From the studios of KPFK Pacifica Radio in Los Angeles, this is Uprising, and I'm Sonali Kohatkar. It's Friday, January 16th, 2015. As protests for Bill Cosby's Denver show gear up, we'll turn to acclaimed civil rights feminist attorney Gloria Allred and blogger and writer Mikki Kendall. Plus, we'll unveil an exclusive excerpt of a newly discovered, previously lost speech by Martin Luther King Jr., given in London in 1964 and preserved only in the Pacifica Radio Archives. And as travel and trade restrictions on Cuba are slowly lifted, we'll speak with Robert Wintner about his new book, Reef Libre, an in-depth look at Cuban exceptionalism and the last best reefs in the world. That's coming up after the news. Joining us now to analyze today's headlines is Cristina Mislan. She's an assistant professor of journalism studies at the Missouri School of Journalism. Hi, Cristina.
Hello, Sonali.
So dozens of arrests of Muslim immigrants have been made in a number of European countries over the last few days, a day after a shooting incident in Belgium involving two men believed to have returned from Syria. 15 people were arrested in Belgium and France in the past 24 hours based on an alleged plot to attack Belgian police. In Germany, 2 people were arrested after police raided a mosque and a dozen homes linked to fears that jihadi fighters were planning an attack. And in France this morning, a hostage situation at a post office ended with no casualties. It is not clear as yet what the intent of that incident was. Last night, French authorities arrested 12 people they suspect are directly linked to the Charlie Hebdo attacks, days after 54 people unconnected to the attacks were arrested for hate speech crimes. Meanwhile, U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry is visiting Paris today, expressing American solidarity with French people. Among the statements he made was, quote, "No nation knows better than France that liberty has a price." Cristina, what do you make of the lens through which European and U.S. leaders are viewing this situation, as though it's a black and white issue of simply freedom versus hate?
Sure. I think it's easy to have this binary of freedom versus hate. It's harder to have a conversation about foreign policy and foreign policy decisions and the blowback that happens. And also, this conversation is it's easier to have this because it's used as a way to justify the curtailing of civil liberties. So for instance, there are politicians now in Europe doing the same thing as in the US in terms of trying to put forth proposals and policies that would use internet censorship and that sort of thing. And so this conversation about freedom versus hate, or that binary, allows governments to say, hey, well, let's get the public on board with curtailing civil liberties.
And then in a war that the U.S. is leading, sources from the Department of Defense announced last night that 400 American troops would be heading to the Middle East to train Syrian rebels in the fight against the Islamic State. Allies like France are also expected to contribute troops. The training sessions will apparently take place in Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and Qatar. The U.S. already has 2,100 troops in northern Iraq, and that number could go up to 3,000. Washington has struggled to identify a coherent group of Syrian rebels to focus on, adding to concerns by critics that sending troops will worsen a situation fraught with conflicting loyalties. Well, Cristina, do you see the story and the first one we talked about regarding jihad in Europe as connected? And hasn't the U.S. learned that training rebel forces can be a very dangerous thing and can result in horrible blowback?
Yes, of course. There's a complete connection between foreign policy decisions and blowback. And so, and we're seeing that happen right now throughout Western Europe. But also, you know, it's interesting because the U.S. seems to never learn from its historical practices and the blowback that has happened since even before its decisions post 9/11. And so, in many ways, it might be blinded by its need to want to maintain this empire, especially the military influence that it has around the world.
And finally, here in the United States, Republicans are struggling to find a coherent policy on immigration. despite having already launched major verbal and legislative attacks on President Obama's executive actions. At a resort in Pennsylvania yesterday, a number of GOP lawmakers from the House and Senate met to hammer out a position, signaling a major split within the party. Conservative hardliners want to stick to the original plan of undoing the modest deferred action for childhood arrivals and deferred action for parental accountability programs, which Obama launched and which could enable millions of undocumented immigrants to stave off deportation. Others prefer a more lenient approach. As of now, it appears as though GOP senators will try to pass a bill like one that the House already passed, which strips funding for the programs. If some Senate Democrats don't join Republicans, the bill will likely be vetoed by the president, once more leaving the GOP without a clear plan. Well, Cristina, what do you think will happen?
Well, if the Senate does pass the bill, then I definitely think that the president will veto it. But here's what I'm also hoping will happen after this goes through, is that we continue the conversation about immigration, but we also start having a conversation that also points out the problems with the bill that President Obama has put forth in the first place. And so, for instance, there are certain policies or certain proposals more so that would increase technological surveillance on the border, that would increase Border Patrol agents. And so while I welcome the conversation that we're having about giving undocumented people in this country a way to actually stay in this country and not have to worry about deportation, at the same time, there are other elements to this proposal that need to be highlighted and also need to be debated. And so I'm hoping what will happen after this is that we can extend that conversation to these other issues, again, in the name of national security.
Cristina, always a pleasure to have you on. We'll talk to you again next Friday.
Thank you, Sonali.
Cristina Mislan is our daily Newsflash guest expert. She's an assistant professor of journalism studies at the Missouri School of Journalism. This is Uprising. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Uprising. I'm Sonali Kolhatkar. You can now watch Uprising on Free Speech TV, which airs on Dish Network Channel 9415, Direct TV Channel 348, and on hundreds of part-time cable affiliates as well as on Roku. It will be exactly 30 years ago this fall that The Cosby Show debuted on American television, making history and creating a beloved institution. Cosby's career has been meteoric, and just when Bill Cosby was poised to make a comeback last year, the whispered allegations of his sexual abuse gained steam and turned into a huge controversy. So far, at least 23 women have come forward claiming that they were in some way sexually assaulted by Cosby. Their stories have many common threads of being drugged and then groped or raped. The latest case is of a woman named Chloe Goins, who say Cosby drugged and molested her when she was 18 back in 2008. While many of the cases have had their statute of limitations expired, this latest case and some others may provide a legal avenue for justice. Cosby has refused to speak out directly about the accusations and maintains his innocence through his lawyers. Even if the legal process may be challenging, the issue has seeped into popular culture, with Golden Globe hosts Amy Poehler and Tina Fey referencing it openly during the recent awards show. Cosby did obliquely refer to the issue himself at a stand-up show in Ontario, Canada, where he joked with a woman in the audience who had gotten up to get a drink, quote, "You have to be careful about drinking around me." Major protests are planned outside Cosby's Denver, Colorado show on Saturday. My guests are Gloria Allred, the acclaimed civil rights feminist lawyer representing some of the women who are alleged victims of Bill Cosby. She joins us on the phone. And on video chat, Mikki Kendall joins us. She's a writer and pop culture analyst and blogger, famous for creating the hashtag Solidarity is for White Women, and has now created Solidarity is for Rapists. Welcome to Uprising, Gloria and Mikki.
Hi, good morning.
Good morning, Gloria. Thanks so much for joining us. Before we get to what will happen in Denver, can you tell us about the current legal situation with respect to getting justice for the women who have come forward? I understand you're representing some of them.
Yes, the legal situation is complex, and that is, in other words, the allegations by many women are that Bill Cosby drugged them and sexually assaulted them. And many of these women, and there is something in the law called the Statute of Limitations, which is an arbitrary time period set by law during which a lawsuit must be filed or a criminal prosecution must take place. And if it doesn't take place within that time period, then the alleged victim is forever barred from doing anything, from achieving any kind of justice whatsoever. And and it's different state by state. It's different often for adult victims of sexual assault than it is for child victims. In case of child sexual abuse, it may be more liberal. And but in any event, most of the alleged victims are barred. It's because it's too late for them to do anything. And there are there's a defamation case going on where some of the alleged victims are saying that he defamed them by essentially having his representatives, or that his representatives suggested that what they were saying was not true. That defamation case may or may not go anywhere, but it has been filed, and it is within the time period to file that kind of case. I've asked and publicly challenged Bill Cosby to agree that he would not assert the defense of statute of limitations, to invite the women to sue, and he could do that. And that way, both he and the alleged victims could have their day in court and let a judge and jury decide.
Right.
I've been in touch with his attorneys. They have not accepted that challenge. He could accept it. Alan Dershowitz, a famed criminal defense attorney who is alleged by an accuser to have sexually abused her when she was a minor, something he vigorously denies, he said that he would agree that he would not assert the defense of statute of limitations. He invites the accuser to sue him and let a judge and jury decide, which I think makes sense. So that's where it stands. There is one, Judith Huth, whom I took to the police, does have a civil lawsuit pending. She alleges in her lawsuit that Bill Cosby sexually abused her when she was 15 years old at the Playboy Mansion. That case is pending. I don't represent her in the civil case, but I did take her to the police.
Well, I want to turn to Mikki Kendall. Now, you've been writing about this, observing this whole case, and the fact that Bill Cosby has been, that several people and many people have come to his defense, the fact that he's still doing his stand-up shows to sell out audiences. Is that why you started the hashtag Solidarity is for Rapists? Mikki?
Hi.
Yeah. Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yeah, I kind of can hear you. There was a weird echo effect happening.
Can you, so the basis for the hashtag Solidarity is for Rapists campaign, is that the result of seeing so many people come to Cosby's defense?
I think it is. I think one of the problems has been that anytime the allegations against Cosby are even attempted to be discussed, particularly among women online, is that there's always an ongoing, oh, well, if it were true, then they would have come forward sooner. If it were true, they would have told someone. And then when you say, well, they did tell someone, people have been coming forward.
Go ahead, Mikki.
And so, I'm sorry, I'm hearing your control room at the same time as I'm hearing you.
Okay. Well, we can just hear you if you can just go ahead with your answer. Yeah.
So one of the things that, happens then is that once you say, well, I think that, when it's 30, I think it's 32 women now across, I think 7 or 8 different states and 50 years and so forth and so on, maybe there's more to this story, you immediately get an influx of people who either have a conspiracy theory answer as to why this is coming up again. Not now, but again. You have people who say, well, he wasn't tried in court, so therefore he's not guilty. Well, no one said that he had been tried in court. Many of these things happened at a point, as has been covered over and over again, where getting a conviction would have been very difficult, even if they had left and immediately gone to the police and all of these things. We know that prosecutors attempted to pursue charges, but too much time had elapsed before reporting. We know that there are allegations that he was coercing people into helping him cover it up. All of these things. it does not sound to many people like a conspiracy of attacking Bill Cosby. It sounds like a conspiracy of silence around Cosby.
Right. Gloria, tell us what's going to happen in Denver on Saturday and how women are attempting to hold Cosby accountable outside court.
Yes, I'm actually flying to Denver today. Tomorrow I am conducting a teach-in and a speak-out about Bill Cosby and allegations that he drugged and sexually assaulted many women. I've invited members of the public who would like to come from Denver to come and meet with me at the Crawford Hotel at 2 o'clock tomorrow. And I'm going to conduct a teach-in and listen to them and others from Denver speak out and express their opinions about Bill Cosby. And I'm going to be accompanied by a Denver woman who alleges that she is a victim of sexual misconduct by Cosby. And so after the teach-in speak out, we are going to be going over to the Buell Theater, which is a few blocks away, where Cosby will be performing at 5 o'clock and 8 o'clock tomorrow night. And we'll be joining a protest outside of the theater because we want women's voices to be heard. We don't think rape is a joke. We're concerned that he made a joke about putting, something in a woman's drink in the last performance in Canada. And so we're going to make our voices heard. He apparently wants to slug this out in the court of public opinion. Apparently he is not anxious to let these women or the alleged victims have their day in court. So if he wants to fight it out in the court of public opinion, we'll be there and let our voices be heard as well.
I want to play for our audience a clip of what happened at the Golden Globes, and then Mikki Kendall, I want to get your response to that. The hosts of those awards, Tina Fey and Amy Poehler, created a bit of an awkward moment when they suddenly jumped into the whole Cosby situation.
Into the woods. It's a weird word to sing, I'm not going to lie to you. Into the woods, Cinderella runs from her prince, Rapunzel is thrown from a tower for her prince, and Sleeping Beauty just thought she was getting coffee with Bill Cosby.
Actually, I don't know if you guys saw this on the news today, but Bill Cosby has finally spoken out about the allegations against him. Cosby admitted to a reporter, "I put the pills in the people! The people did not want the pills in them!"
No, Tina, that's not right. That's not right. It's more like, I got the pills in the bathroom, but I put them in the people.
You're right. It's got to be like, "I put the pills in the hoagie."
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
That's it. That's fair.
That seems fair.
And that is the Golden Globes Award just a few days ago, Tina Fey and Amy Poehler. Mikki Kendall, what do you make of this exchange? I mean, certainly this issue has seeped into popular culture, and some people say you should never make a rape joke, but in this case, apparently these two women were able to pull it off.
I think that the fact that at least one of the victims her lawyer has spoken up and said that this is a traumatic event that should not be joked about is pretty much the statement that we need to make on this. I didn't find the joke funny or appropriate. I didn't think it was empowering. I know that there are people who feel differently, but I think that when we make of this a caricature, it helps undermine the idea that this is a serious offense.
And Mikki, what about the fact that Cosby himself joked about it in Ontario? I mean, people were shocked that he even alluded to it. And let me repeat, there was a woman in the audience who got up to get a drink, and he said, "You have to be careful drinking around me." He got people in the audience actually laughed at that.
Which says a lot about our culture and why sexual assault is often treated as a crime that is not as serious as it is or as traumatic as it is. I know that people try to say that what happened on stage at the Golden Globes was somehow a feminist moment. Well, if you're making essentially the same joke that the alleged rapist is making, what exactly is feminist about that? What exactly is funny about that? That's rape culture in action.
Gloria Allred, what would justice for these women who've come forward look like? What would your dream scenario be? I'm assuming Cosby agreeing to some kind of suit to say, fine, if I haven't actually done anything, then I'm going to agree to let justice go through so that I can clear my name. But then if the allegations are true, are women some of the women victims looking for financial compensation or simply just getting the truth out there?
Okay,
or
well,
prison
two things.
time.
One, in reference to the joke, by the way, by Cosby, the so-called joke, especially in context, the fact that years ago he was joking on a recording about Spanish fly, and that for women, which is like putting something in a woman's drink, that might cause her to be unconscious or incapacitated, which is what Spanish fly was. It, makes it particularly, gruesome that he would joke about this. Or having a drink around him and a woman. What would justice look like? Well, I mean, justice would look like if this could be decided in a court of law. I also offered publicly and challenged him that if he didn't want the public scrutiny of a courtroom, that we could do an arbitration or mediation behind closed doors, confidentially, with retired judges, and let them decide what evidence the alleged victims have and whether there is merit to their claims, and hear his defenses from him and his lawyers, and then award appropriate damages to the alleged victims if the judges find in their favor, according to the proof of damages that the alleged victims can offer. So that also has been rejected by Bill Cosby. So I think justice at this point for many of them is going to be able to speak out and let their voices be heard and let Cosby know that just women are not going to suffer in silence anymore.
And Mikki Kendall, former Newsweek editor Mark Whitaker wrote a biography of Bill Cosby just a few months ago entitled Cosby, His Life and Times. He completely avoided the issue of sexual assault and the allegations over rape. And this is what he said, quote, "I didn't want to print allegations that I couldn't confirm independently. But given how many women have come forward, you would have thought that he would have taken the time to talk to at least one of them?"
I at this point, I feel as though we've entered sort of a bizarre area where he just has decided he's not going to deal with reality, and other people have decided with him they're not going to deal with reality. I mean, he's still on tour. Yes, the show has currently been suspended, but in some ways, Cosby is, I assume, expecting the same thing has happened with Woody Allen. Some things got pulled from Netflix. There was a brief period of discussion of what happened with Dylan Farrow. And then the next thing we know, Woody Allen now has a partnership with Amazon to produce a new show. I think Cosby expects this to blow over. I think a lot of Cosby's supporters expect this to blow over.
And finally, Gloria Allred, one last question for you. How do you respond to what Mikki was referring to earlier, that this is a conspiracy theory that these women are just coming forward to bring Bill Cosby down? Don't women who come out and say that they've been victimized by such a famous man, or for that matter any man, pay a huge social price?
Well, they do, because a lot of times women are not believed, and so you're exactly right about that. And first of all, most of these women don't even know each other. Many of these women contacted me, and they never heard anybody else's story at the time they contacted me, and yet told me very similar, descriptions of what they allege occurred and what they suffered because of Bill Cosby. So that's just nonsense. And, what Bill Cosby should do is he should come out and publicly address each and every allegation by every woman, and let's see, whether he is going to accept the responsibility or deny them or not. He hasn't done that. He's hiding behind his lawyers. So, we'll have to see what happens next. But if anyone listening is going to be in Denver tomorrow, I just want to invite you to our event, which is free, but you should at the Crawford Hotel in Denver at 2:00 tomorrow, or tell your friends or family members or coworkers who might be there to come, and they should RSVP today to Carol -Lease, that's LEASE, at empowermentprogram.org. Carol-Lease, LEASE, at empowermentprogram.org. I would love to meet you in person there at 2:00, and I'm looking forward to a successful teach-in, speak-out about Bill Cosby.
Well, I want to thank you so much, Ms. Allred, for joining us today, and best of luck to you.
Thank you.
I want to have one last question for Mikki Kendall. Mikki, how important has social media been to put forward this idea that rapists don't deserve our solidarity, that in an era when we are dominated by the news cycle, but we also have a voice directly in peer-to-peer communications through social media, that we can change the dialogue? Mikki?
I'm sorry, I
What-
can't hear anything
how-
that you're saying right
How
now.
important is social media at a time like this?
I think social media is very important at a time like this because right now, even if you can't get your voice out in any other way, you can absolutely turn to Twitter, you can turn to Tumblr, and it's an old Firefox joke about not being able to stop the signal that sort of comes into play here. It's unfortunate, but the truth is that if you're not being heard in other ways, you at least now can be heard via social media. You can reach out, you can network. For a lot of the people involved in this, I think one of the things that's been most telling has been that women who maybe had never heard about what was going on with Cosby before, people who had never had any idea, were now saying, oh wait, those rumors I heard as a kid, those rumors I've heard wherever, those weren't just made up stories, because I've talked to several people, and I'm one of them too, who heard these kinds of things about him years ago from our elders, and it's not new information, but it probably feels like new information because it wasn't widely reported in the media.
Well, Mikki Kendall, always a pleasure to have you on. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
My guest has been Mikki Kendall, acclaimed pop culture analyst, writer, and blogger. And before that, we heard, of course, from Gloria Allred, the acclaimed civil rights lawyer and feminist who's representing some of the alleged victims of Bill Cosby. This is Uprising. When we come back, we will hear an exclusive excerpt of a speech by Martin Luther King Jr. given more than 50 years ago that until a few months ago was lost. Stay tuned. Welcome back to Uprising. I'm Sonali Kohatkar. You can now watch Uprising online at our YouTube channel at youtube.com/uprising with Sonali. Please do subscribe. On December 7th, 1964, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. gave an hour-long speech at Temple Hall in London. He was on his way to Oslo to claim his Nobel Peace Prize. It was a time of intense transformation in the United States, months after the passage of the Civil Rights Act and months before the Voting Rights Act was enacted. After years of painful struggle, the civil rights movement was gaining ground and making real change. While contemporary films such as Selma have memorialized Dr. King and the historic movement that he led, there's nothing like hearing King's own voice, his passions, his cadence, and the questions of injustice that drove him. The December 7th, 1964 speech was lost, and the only piece of it that ever remained was a 2-minute, 45-second video from the BBC, which reported it. But 50 years later, the Pacifica Radio Archives discovered the entire recording of the 62-minute-long speech hidden for decades in its vault. Brian DeShazer, director of the Pacifica Radio Archives, discovered the speech in real format and oversaw its preservation. On Monday, on the occasion of Martin Luther King Jr. Day, Democracy Now! Will debut a lengthy excerpt of the speech, and today we're so proud to present for our audience a tiny excerpt, an exclusive debut of a speech that hasn't been heard in 50 years and is the only known recording of the speech. Here is the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. speaking in London City Temple Hall on December 7th, 1964. First, you'll hear one of his London hosts introducing him and warning the audience not to heckle.
He is an honored guest from a country which I believe, unlike Britain, has no tradition, as we have, of heckling and interruption. And I ought to say that in America, disagreements are, I believe, reserved for question time. Now, I'm sure that all of us tonight, whatever views we hold, will afford Dr. King the courtesy of a fair hearing, even those of us who may disagree with him. And I ought to say that the stewards have my instructions to ask anybody who feels emotionally moved to interrupt to leave the hall immediately.
I want to talk with you mainly about our struggle in the United States, and before taking my seat, talk about some of the larger struggles in the whole world, and some of the more difficult struggles in places like South Africa. But that is a desperate, poignant question on the lips of people all over our country and all over the world. I get it almost everywhere I go and almost every press conference. It is a question of whether we are making any real progress in the struggle to make racial justice a reality in the United States of America. And whenever I seek to answer that question, on the one hand, I seek to avoid an undue pessimism. On the other hand, I seek to avoid a superficial optimism. And I try to incorporate or develop what I consider a realistic position by admitting on the one hand that we have made many significant strides over the last few years in the struggle for racial justice, but by admitting that before the problem is solved, we still have numerous things to do and many challenges to meet. And it is this realistic position that I would like to use as a basis for our thinking together tonight as we think about the problem in the United States. We have come a long, long way, but we have a long, long way to go before the problem is solved. Now let us notice first that we've come a long, long way, and I would like to say at this point that the Negro himself has come a long, long way in re-evaluating his own intrinsic worth. Now, in order to illustrate this, a little history is necessary. It was in the year 1619 when the first Negro slaves landed on the shores of America. And they were brought there from the soils of Africa. Unlike the Pilgrim Fathers who landed at Plymouth a year later, they were brought there against their will. And throughout slavery, the Negro was treated in a very inhuman fashion. He was a thing to be used, not a person to be respected. The United States Supreme Court rendered a decision in 1857 known as the Dred Scott decision, which well illustrated this whole idea and which well illustrated what existed at that time. But in this decision, the Supreme Court of the United States said in substance that the Negro is not a citizen of the United States. He is merely property subject to the dictates of his owner. And it went on to say that the Negro has no rights that the white man is bound to respect. And this was the idea that prevailed during the days of slavery. With the growth of slavery, it became necessary to give some justification for it. You know, it seems to be a fact of life that human beings cannot continue to do wrong without eventually reaching out for some thin rationalization to clothe an obvious wrong in the beautiful garments of righteousness. And this is exactly what happened during the days of slavery. There were those who even misused the Bible and religion to give some justification for slavery and to crystallize the patterns of the status quo. And so it was argued from some pulpits that the Negro was inferior by nature because of Noah's curse upon the children of Ham. And then the Apostle Paul's dictum became a watchword: servants, be obedient to your master. And one brother had probably read the logic of the great philosopher Aristotle. You know, Aristotle did a great deal to bring into being what we now know as formal logic in philosophy. And in formal logic, that is a big word known as the syllogism, which has a major premise, a minor premise, and a conclusion. And so this brother decided to put his argument for the inferiority of the Negro in the framework of an Aristotelian syllogism. He could say all men are made in the image of God. This was the major premise. Then came the minor premise. God, as everybody knows, is not a Negro. Therefore, the Negro is not a man. This was the kind of reasoning that prevailed. Well, living with the conditions of slavery and then later segregation, many Negroes lost faith in themselves. Many came to feel that perhaps they were less than human. Many came to feel that they were inferior. This, it seems to me, is the greatest tragedy of slavery, the greatest tragedy of segregation, not merely what it does to the individual physically, but what it does to one psychologically. It scars the soul of the segregated as well as the segregator. It gives the segregator a false sense of superiority while leaving the segregated with a false sense of inferiority. And this is exactly what happened. But then something happened to the Negro. Circumstances made it possible and necessary for him to travel more. The coming of the automobile, the upheavals of 2 world wars, the Great Depression. And so his rural plantation background gradually gave way to urban industrial life. His economic life was gradually rising through the growth of industry, the development of organized labor, and expanded educational opportunities. And even his cultural life was gradually rising through the steady decline of crippling illiteracy. All of these forces conjoined to cause the Negro in America to take a new look at himself. Negro masses all over began to reevaluate themselves. And then something else happened along with all of this. The Negro in the United States turned his eyes and his mind to Africa. And he noticed the magnificent drama of independence taking place on the stage of African history. And noticing the developments, and noticing what was happening, and noticing what was being done on the part of his black brothers and sisters in Africa, gave him a new sense of dignity in the United States and a new sense of self-respect.
You've been listening to an excerpt of a December 1964 speech by Martin Luther King Jr., previously thought to have been lost. Tune into Democracy Now! On Monday to listen to much more of this historic speech. I want to take a moment to thank the Pacifica Radio Archives team, a tiny group of extremely dedicated staff who've worked tirelessly to preserve our audio history, the oldest and largest collection of public radio programming in the United States. Without them, the speech would have remained hidden and perhaps lost. Please do support the archives in any way you can at pacificaradioarchives.org. This is Uprising. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Uprising. I'm Sonali Kohatkar. Keeping his word on relaxing the Cuba embargo, President Obama announced yesterday that travel and trade restrictions between the U.S. and Cuba would be significantly eased. The move comes weeks after a surprise announcement by the president on a historic détente with Cuba. Most Americans will be able to travel to Cuba without requesting special permission from authorities and spending money on the island nation using their credit cards eventually. But there is a dark side to the easing of travel restrictions. As an inadvertent result of the international isolation, Cuba has retained the world's most pristine marine environment. Because of Cuba's limited ability to purchase pesticides, the island has been forced to rely on entirely organic farming, avoiding the chemical runoff into the ocean that plagues most industrialized nations. And because of a ban on the aquarium trade, Cuba's marine wildlife population is untouched. Additionally, a non-existent tourist industry has protected marine life. As a result, a number of endangered animal and plant species thrive in Cuba, and its abundant coral reef formations are a global treasure. Robert Wintner, a.k.a. Snorkel Bob, is the author of Reef Libre, an in-depth look at Cuban exceptionalism and the last best reefs in the world. He has a short film out by the same name. Wintner's earlier books include Some Fishes I Have Known. He now joins us from Hawaii. Welcome to Uprising. We're going to try to get you back on video chat with us. And Robert Wintner, whose book is Reef Libre, also known by the name Snorkel Bob because he runs a chain of snorkel rental equipment in Hawaii and has, of course, also written about Hawaii's own coral reefs and is an ardent activist against the aquarium trade. We'd actually interviewed him on our program a couple of years ago about his earlier book, Some Fishes I Have Known. You can check out our website at uprisingwithsonali.com. We have Robert back with us. Can you hear me? Hi, Robert. Can you hear me? Well, we will get him on the phone then, since we're having trouble with our video chat. And, you know, folks, that's what happens on live radio and television. So do bear with us. We're going to call Robert Wintner back on. So if you go to uprisingwithsonali.com and search for Wintner, W-I-N-T-N-E-R, you'll be able to find the earlier interview that we had done with him about the aquarium trade. Of course, the situation with Cuba, very interesting, that we're about to turn to. As a result of the embargo, you have the situation beneath the surface of the ocean where things have thrived, even as things on the island haven't necessarily done so because of the international isolation. And that might reverse when the embargo is relaxed completely and when people can travel there. Robert, are you with us?
I am.
Well, thanks so much for joining us. Well, first, tell us how incredible and pristine Cuba's coral reefs are. I doubt highly that any of our listeners or viewers have had the chance to see them firsthand.
It's quite compelling, Sonali. We hear stories all the time of how nature used to be, and that's the way it is in Cuba. I'm getting feedback. I'm going to turn this down. We were compelled to go there because what you described as a virtually non-existent tourism industry, it does exist, but it's been mostly Europeans and Canada, those countries that have had diplomatic relations with Cuba. But what you have to remember is it's been minimal, and besides none of the things going on, there's been no development. One of the great shots I felt was kind of a non-shot taken from the balcony of the Copacabana Hotel of what in the USA would be prime billion-dollar waterfront real estate. It's untouched since 1959. It's ruins. What they have a word in Cuba, derrumba, which translates, I think it's idiomatic. It translates to implosion, which is what's happening to their just incredibly beautiful architecture now. They have begun to take steps to repair some of old Havana Vieja. But it's a slow process, and I think that normalizing relations at this point is going to help that effort. It's just, you have to assume the one reason we wanted to dive in Havana first is that it is an urban center, and every time you get a concentration of humanity, you're going to have some effect on nature. And you have to assume that their infrastructure is so nominal, minimal, and on many levels non-existent. You have to that all their waste is direct drive into the ocean. So that was a concern. You can find an isolated rock in the world, and you'll have a pristine reef. But to compare that to an urban setting in Cuba was our objective. So we dove there first. Sure enough, if you get out to a depth of 40 feet, which is maybe a half mile offshore, it's pretty much barren rubble bottom. As soon as you get to the 40-foot drop, it's perfect. Biodiversity is optimal. All the species are there. They've even discovered species they thought were extinct, both on the reef and on dry land.
And Robert, you've talked about Cuba having a perfect or like 100% apex predators. What does that mean? What are apex predators?
Apex predators are at the top of the food chain. They're the animals that no other species preys on. And on a reef, it would be sharks, moray eels, big groupers, barracudas. That would be primarily your apex set. And the big event in Cuba, Cubans are highly outspoken. I'll digress just for a minute. They talk about the Soviet model, and that went away when the Soviet Union collapsed. Now they talk about the Chinese model, whatever that is. Chinese now have state capitalism, which sounds to me like an oxymoron. What most people don't realize is that with normalization of trade or visiting, they're going to have the American model. Americans are irrepressible. They're the only culture that I've ever observed that have a self-effacing value. It's a sense of humor. We make fun of ourselves, and we have a great time doing it, and it makes us a better culture. Cubans have the same thing. And, that's what is exciting to see. One day, and so they're very outspoken, and they have a cynical side, which I particularly appreciate. And some of them love Fidel, and some of them resent Fidel. But this isn't political. This whole study is not meant to be political. We have observations because they're interesting. But one day, Fidel Castro, no matter what you think, one day Fidel Castro said no mas on killing sharks. Now, where I live, we're particularly sensitive to the Pacific and Indian Oceans and what the president of Palau calls the insatiable Asian appetite. Poaching is killing reefs around the world. And the guy I talked to in Cuba, Fausto de Neve Herrera, became a good friend. I said, what is the deal with you and sharks? You're nowhere near Asia. What was the threat? And he said, we ate our sharks. Sharks were our staple protein. Here's the rub, Sonali. The Cuban people are hungry, and they laugh about it, but they laugh to keep from crying. It's a dire situation. They do have poverty. They eat fried butter, which is another joke, and they still eat it. What is fried butter? You take a wad of butter, you dunk it in flour, and you fry it, and you call that a meal. Well, will it sustain life? Kind of, sort of. They're still hungry. They want to fish. Fidel said no mas on sharks. Then he said no mas on commercial fishing. And, I'm a reef dog. Do I love people? Well, some of them, yeah. But I'm just elated with what's happened in Cuba. Their reefs came back. The jewel in the crown is a place called Jardines de la Reina, Gardens of the Queen. And up until, 15, 18 years ago, it was another fished out, left for dead pile of rubble. It's a mangrove estuary rising right out of deep water ocean in the Gulf of Ana Maria, 70 miles south of the Cuban coast. Now, everything south of Cuba is a shark sanctuary. This is just background, but it's important to know, every healthy reef should support 15 to 20 sharks. We pulled up to our first dive site when we got there, and we thought, well, this looks okay. And our leader, Manuel, said, this is a very special place, not to worry. And all of a sudden, we saw a dorsal fin break the water. Well, we've seen that before. We're all, inveterate water people. But then the shark came to the surface. These sharks, they were 10 feet long, maybe 11, and that's okay. But they were so big and muscular, they were 4 to 5 feet wide. And we're thinking, we're all macho divers thinking, why would we want to get out of a perfectly good boat? And then there was another dorsal fin, and then 6 more. And Manuel, get in the water, do not hesitate, go to the bottom. And we did. And by day 3, we were casual. We felt real good about it. They were mostly silky sharks and Caribbean reef sharks, but the bull sharks, tiger sharks, and hammerheads do hang out there. When they allowed the sharks to come back, shark finning and sharks in general are now big news around the world. But still, very few people realize how much of ocean recovery can come from sharks.
Now,
just let them alone.
Robert, I want to play for our audience a clip from your film, the short film that accompanies your book and has the same name, Reef Libre, an in-depth look at Cuban exceptionalism and the last best reefs in the world, so that our TV audience at least can see what you saw.
Okay.
One day, Fidel Castro said, "No más, no more killing sharks." Then came no more commercial fishing. Here's what happened. A mangrove estuary covering 1,100 square miles in the Gulf of Ana Maria met redemption. Jardines de la Reina was, one more fished out, gang raped, and left for dead pile of bones. It became the most abundant, prolific, biodiverse reef system on Earth. It is the last best reef system in the world. Can it stay that way now that Cuba and the United States have opened the gates to tourism and development?
Well, that is a big question, Robert. Now that, and this, of course, the news just came this week, can a tourist industry coexist with a pristine marine life in Cuba, given that we now know what we know about how to preserve reefs, how to preserve marine life, what regulations are needed to have tourism and to perhaps keep this pristine nature? Is it possible?
It's going to take diligence. The fellow I talked to, I told you, he became a friend. I said, Fausto, here's the problem. And I know I sound cynical because I can't help it. If this were Hawaii, a developer would come into Jardines de la Reina and say, look, I'm going to put up 800 floating condominiums. It's going to be prosperity and jobs for everybody. And here's the win-win. Not only will these reefs not be hurt, they're going to be in better shape when I'm done. And Fausto thought about that for about 3 seconds, and then he said, that will not happen. What you fear will not happen. And I said, and why won't it? The Cuban government is hurting for money. And Fausto was a loyal Cuban. He said, it won't happen because we will fight to keep it from happening. And I said, well, we're in this together, brother. And that transcends communism, capitalism, whatever you want to call it. When reef dogs band together, then it can happen. The most effective idea I've heard is to make Jardines a World Heritage Site. The pressure for more money and more traffic will be horrendous. I'm a guy... tourism has been very good to me, but tourism must be managed. And the same goes with development and effluent. They need to manage this very smart, and I think they have so far. The question is, what will happen after the Castros? That's one question you can ask the man on the street, and what you get consensually is, we don't know. Fidelito, Fidel's son, is now about 65. He's not political. Everyone anticipates it will be another Castro or somebody close to the family, but nobody knows. It's speculation. And so it's also speculative on what that person's values will be. Reef tourism has, and all tourism in general, has bailed the Cuban economy, has kept them from really falling apart. When the Soviet Union collapsed, they lost 100% of their economic support. Sugar could not do it. And first they tolerated tourism, then they accept it, now they embrace it. So it's going to take some smart, committed people. You'll notice that this book is dedicated to the Cuba crew. Every person we met not only understood the aloha industry and hospitality and person-to-person warmth and friendship, they were committed, dedicated, and they got my dedication as well in return.
Robert, as we're talking about this, a study was released this week that warned of mass extinction in the oceans the world over because of industrialization. And the word Armageddon was associated with this study, wildlife Armageddon. Isn't Cuba an incredible glimpse into what the world's oceans might have been had it not been for humanity, had it not been for industrialization? And is there an any hope that Cuba's approach can provide a model for revitalizing or reviving oceans and marine life in other parts of the world?
Well, I think the obvious answer is yes. One of the great things, regardless of what political system you believe in, in democracy we have committee hearings and all that other pesky process, and that's a good thing. But when we have a problem like reefs dying, we live in a TV mentality world. If you don't like it, you change the channel. Peter Sellers made a movie with a guy who carried around a remote control, and he saw something he didn't like, he'd push the buttons. We hear stories about ocean Armageddon weekly now. Is anybody listening? Well, I think it's in one ear and out the other. What's for dinner, by the way? I don't know what's going to bring the message home. Have the Cubans done a masterful job here? Oh, you bet. They are smart people. They're artistic. They have a sense of humor. And I hate to effuse this strongly about any place. And I always say we must endorse a tourist destination with great caution. And I'm in tourism, and I believe in tourism. But there can be a stampede that can just change a place for the worse.
Well, where can listeners get a copy of your book and DVD?
At Amazon.com, Reef Libre.
And we will
we're very
post.
pleased with it. It's gotten some great attention even before it came out.
And we'll post a link to that on our website, uprisingwithsonali.com. Is there another website you'd like to give out with your other persona?
SnorkelBob.com. This is another Snorkel Bob expedition, and we take this work on, and it's a huge undertaking. The one thing that keeps us going is it's great fun, but to get the material and put it all together is it's quite a job, and if we didn't have so much fun doing it, I don't think we would do it.
Thank you so much, and best of luck to you. Robert Wintner, my guest, is the author of Reef Libre, an in-depth look at Cuban exceptionalism and the last best reefs in the world. This is Uprising. Bipasha Shom is our senior producer. Anna Buss is our assistant producer. Dan Swerdlove is our technical director. Christian Beck is our production assistant. Teddy Robinson and Jonathan Alexander are our audio engineers. Subscribe to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/uprising with Sonali. Our website is uprisingwithsonali.com. Our theme music is by Quetzal. I'm Sonali, co-head host and executive producer of Uprising. Have a wonderful weekend, and I will see you Monday.